my parents got me a pony for Christmas. And before you get jealous, know that this led to an adolescence of shit. Literally, much of my life has revolved around putting things in one end of a horse and scooping them out the other end. So my pony's name was Spike. He was brown, short, and fat, and he had this stubby, thick black mane, and we were fast friends. We lived closer to the city of Pittsburgh then, in the creatively named town of Mars, Pennsylvania. It had a very intelligent sign that said, named after the star of Mars. So shortly after we got Spike, my parents found out that zoning laws forbade them from building a barn, and Spike lived in the garage for a little while. While we looked for a farm. When I was 10, Abernethy Acres was founded on a 60-acre piece of land on the edge of the town of Harrisville, population 900. Now, it's a funny thing when someone asks me where I'm from. My grandparents grew up in Pittsburgh proper, my parents grew up in Mars, and I spent much of my adolescence in Harrisville, even though I hate saying I'm from Harrisville. If anyone in that part of Pennsylvania even noticed the one red light town, it was because they stopped off at the Gun World on their way to go deer hunting. So when I joined the 5th grade at Harmer Elementary, I was the 31st student, the largest class to ever go through the one class per grade school. Slippery Rock area middle school was a little bit larger. Typically I say I'm from Slippery Rock. But I immediately didn't fit in. On the first day, I showed up in a frilly dress, as I often do, and the rest of the kids looked like they dragged their jeans through cow shit before they showed up to school. I eventually adapted to my cow shit classmates, but I was still considered the new kid up until graduation. I joined the cheerleading squad, and I served as president of my 4-H club twice. For those who don't know, that's a club for kids who have livestock. It's kind of like Future Farmers of America, except for a little classier than the Future Farmers. FFA, we look down on them, a little bit of a rivalry there. They're the Packers to our Bears. Hey! Whatever, I'm a Steeler fan. What are you going to do? Okay, wow. So, that is Harrisville. Many other horses came and went. Spike was never alone. We had as many as 11 horses at one point. We also raised chickens, ducks, a few sheep, and a lot of cats and dogs. Spike was the one constant, though. When I got bigger, my little brother rode him, showed him at the 4-H shows. I could drive him in a cart, even whenever I was too big to ride him. That's like the Amish do. If I were Amish, I would fit right in, except for the clothes. They don't have frilly dresses or zippers. So my younger cousins fawned over him, and my parents swore that they would never sell him. And if I was hating the world like any teenage girl does, I had Spike to escape to. I would brush out his forever tangled, disgusting mane. I don't know how he got mud inside of it. It was gross. But he would eat anything. The first time we went to a horse show and won a blue ribbon, I woke up the next morning to find out that he had eaten it. He chewed it right off the front of his horse stall. Really classy. He also would drink Mountain Dew if I fed it to him, and applesauce, salsa, pretty much anything you could name, he would eat it. He was a large goat. But the best part was giving Spike a bath. He liked to grab the end of the hose with his teeth and suck on it and spray water everywhere. So that was my teen years. Shoveling horse shit, baling hay, and line dancing at Ghost Riders, a honky-tonk club with a mechanical bull and a massive dance floor. I got restless, of course. I always knew I'd go elsewhere. For some reason, I thought that would be Chicago. Not sure why, though. I knew nothing of Chicago. Absolutely nothing. I never even knew anyone who'd been to Chicago. All I knew was that there were tall buildings and John Hughes characters. And John Cusack. In high school, I got really into John Cusack. But I'd never been there. I never met anyone. And on the map, I thought it might be in Indiana. But I wasn't quite sure. Could have been Wisconsin. Not sure. So Chicago is just some mythical place where John Cusack was and tall buildings were there. And where I grew up, we rarely went to Pittsburgh. Not because it was 60 miles away, but because everyone seemed to be really afraid of it. If you watch TV news and all you see are stories about crime and violence, you start to think that that's the only thing that happens there. Much like how I think Indiana, the only thing to do is hoard cats. So we went to museums and the zoo for field trips, but other than that, it was just a place where we visited my great Aunt Betty, and as far as I knew, Pittsburgh smelled like old people and stale crackers. Chicago, though, mysterious wonderland that probably smelled like unicorn poop and funnel cakes. That was where I wanted to be. The first time I spent any significant amount of time in anything resembling a city was in college. I went to Dickinson College in a small town in Pennsylvania, but I spent my junior year studying abroad in Bologna, Italy. I traveled around a little bit, saw a bunch of other cities like London and Paris and shit. I figured a lot of them out, but Bologna was my place, and I made things a little bit more difficult adding in a language barrier, and I was an oblivious hick from the second I stepped on the plane. I got locked in a bathroom at Charles de Gaulle Airport. I fell over on an airport shuttle because I didn't think about holding on to anything whenever it moved. I was kind of an idiot. Whenever we got to Bologna, one of my professors insisted on showing me how the transit system worked because the entire theory of it eluded me. On top of that, there were prostitutes that stood in front of my apartment, so that just added to the intimidation. It reminded me of when I was 14, I went to Boston to spend a week with my aunt and uncle. And as I was getting on the plane, my dad was terribly nervous because, you know, cities are where violence happens. And he was terrified. He told me not to stand around looking up the skyscrapers like a rube, because that's how you get mugged. So take note. After college, I moved to Washington, D.C., and I still don't know why. I never really liked the place, but that's where all my friends were moving, and I kind of liked politics at that time. But if there's anything that can make you hate politics, it's a 22-year-old ex-frat boy with a popped collar at a bar in Georgetown bragging about his congressional internship. That'll make you hate politics. So I decided to pursue writing for real. And I had this really nice boss who encouraged me to go to journalism school, and I asked if there were any good schools in Chicago. And she said, yeah, Northwestern. Well, I applied, and I got in, and then I was on my way to the land of John Cusack. I still wasn't convinced Chicago was a real place, though, so I bought a plane ticket to check it out before I accepted, just to be sure. Because technically it said it was in Evanston, and I didn't know where that was. That looked like it was in Wisconsin. I couldn't figure it out. So there was one thing I wanted to see, and that was the Sears Tower. So I flew into Midway Airport, and I was taking the orange line up to the red line to the purple line to get up to Evanston. And you guys made it super confusing. You have two buildings that are tall and black and have two white antennas on top, and I couldn't figure it out, and I was really pissed off. But I was excited anyway because I thought there were two Sears Towers. I saw two of them. So I spent a day and a half here, and that's all I needed to fall in love. It wasn't enough time to see much more than all those silver shiny things that are in that park by the lake. So I checked out a couple of bars, and that was pretty much all I needed. There were all these tall, corn-fed Midwestern boys that weren't bragging about these shitty internships they had. They were talking about, like, Iowa and stuff. It was really cool. So I flew back to D.C., and I moved back to Chicago as quickly as I could in June 2008. And it was a damn good time to be in Chicago. That was all hopey and changey that summer. Was leading up to the 2008 election. And I met my new friend Liz, and she and I skipped a class to go see the new Batman movie. And I got to write the politics beat for school, which leading up to the election was fantastic. And I wound up in Hyde Park election night, which was a highlight of my life. And I started writing for this website, Chicagoist. Chicagoist.com, just saying. It's a good one. I'm now employed there full-time, but then I was just dabbling, and Mr. Marcus Gilman back there showed me mercy and let me write things, and he edited them mercilessly. So I made friends, and I met all those sweet corn-fed Midwestern boys who were polite despite being total idiots. play cornhole and stuff like that. So I found the Green Mill and Delilah's. I learned that karaoke can be really fun at Alice's. Back before it became some hipster hideout, it's really annoying now. I also frequented this dive bar by my apartment called Champions. It had one Yelp review that said, "If this is where champions go, I don't want to know where the losers hang out." But they let me put the Steeler game on and bring in to-go orders from the diner next door. And by the time the Super Bowl came around that year, they were all rooting for me. All the old guys at the bar, they were all rooting for me. And then Blagojevich was arrested in December. Having written my college thesis on political corruption, I was in heaven. Chicago was the perfect place for me, and of all the places I've lived, Chicago was the only city that ever felt like home. I went back to Pennsylvania for Christmas that year, and told my parents how wonderful everything was in Chicago, how much I loved my life, and all the rainbows and sunshine that went with it. And I visited Spike briefly, and then I returned to Chicago. But on January 3rd, my mother called me in tears to tell me that Spike died. Now, I've mentioned a lot of animals here, and not many of them are still alive. So we're pretty used to animals dying on the farm. But this was different. Spike started it all. It was all his fault that we lived on a farm. If he hadn't been so fat and lovable, I might have had a normal suburban upbringing. None of us took it very well. Spike wasn't very old, and we thought he had another 10 years in him, but my mom said that Spike just dropped very suddenly. My dad has since admitted that he tried to give him mouth to mouth. He won't admit, though, whether he tried to blow in the nostril or the mouth, because the physics don't work either way. Anyway, when Spike died, I was inconsolable. It was around that time I started going to carols a lot, and I spent more time with country music. Now, I've had a love-hate relationship with country music my whole life. My parents have always listened to country music, among other things, like we had this dog named Pink Floyd, and their first dance at their wedding was to Freebird. So, I grew up with country music, both good and bad, from Johnny Cash and Dolly Parton. My middle name is Sue, by the way, and I'm named after my dad, Samuel. To George Strait and Garth Brooks. So I eventually found my own favorite music, but I could never escape my dad's music in the barn. I tried once to change the station on the old radio out in the barn, and he was furious when he went out there and TLC was playing. But that's fine, country music belongs in a bar, and he went. Now carols, if you haven't been there, it's a really odd bar. There are two kinds of music there, country and western. You know, like Blues Brothers, except for they don't really throw bottles there. But there's this weird band of middle-aged folks there, and it's not a particularly good band at all. They take good songs and do mediocre versions of them. Well, they do a mediocre version of this one song that I've known forever, and it's always been my favorite country song. Carols is the only place in Chicago where I've heard it. It is the perfect country and western song. I've known the words to it as long as I can remember, including this speaking portion, which references the songwriter, a certain Steve Goodman. For my entire life, I had no idea who Steve Goodman was. He's the guy who did Go Cubs Go, you know, and Lakeshore Drive and City of New Orleans. He wrote a lot of songs that revolve around Chicago, and I didn't know until probably 2 years ago that the guy had any Chicago connection, and I've spent my whole life loving this song and singing his name and not knowing who the hell the guy was. But it turns out he wrote more than just that one David Allan Coe song that I know so well. And now I know that I have Chicago to thank for everything, including my love of country music.
It's good you only know a mediocre version of it. Takes a lot of the pressure off. We play this song under protest, only because there is no more whiskey on stage. It doesn't seem right. But it was all I could do to keep from crying. Sometimes it seems so useless to remain. You don't have to call me darling, darling. You never even call me by my name. You don't have to call me